Good evening. It's 7:42. It started to rain after a very hot day, and apparently the temperature's gone from like low to mid 40s Celsius, and because of the rain, it's gone down to 26. But this fan here, which you can hear in the background, it says 30. So there must be more heat on the inside than on the outside. But I've just been lazing around today because it's made me very enervated, as this kind of heat always does. And I didn't bother wearing any coverage because I just want my skin to breathe, you know? It is Friday, it's the end of the week, thank God. I applied for my visa for Vietnam. But I want to talk in this video about something else. Okay, so here's the question. Are you white? Or are you a person of colour? Both? None of the above? I mean, being Anglo-Indian Australian is not so explicable in those terms, because Anglo-Indian heritage and identity, or identities, are a certain kind of cultural specificity, historical cultural specificity, which includes both people in India and those who left, especially after independence in 47, and are part of the diaspora. There's so many myths about us, and here's a newsflash. Being Anglo-Indian is not about your so-called phenotype, right? So it's not about the colour of your skin. We come in all shades, and that's true of my ancestors. So I look quite a bit like my great aunt, for example, Doris. Very similar facial features and eyes, and even similar colouring. And I also look a fair amount like my grandfather. So both of them were born in British India, and they were part British, Irish, and also descended from different mixtures of Eurasian populations, significantly Irish Bengali, right? But the family, for one reason or another, had been in the subcontinent for something like 300 plus years, as long as the East India Company was there, and that's way before the Raj. So there was always a lot of mixing. So things like percentages of Indian or percentages of European, they mattered very little when it comes to that heritage and that cultural specificity. That's not to say that the politics of race and whiteness, racialization and whiteness, don't still pretend. But categories such as person of color or white, they're not the best for Anglo-Indian realities. As I said, like I had a great aunt who had similar colouring to me, similar features, the big eyes, yeah, the deep set eyes, the nose, the bone structure, very similar, striking. And her brother, that is not my grandfather, but his brother, he was quite brown. So in one generation, you can have all of that variation. I've shown photos of him, of this great uncle that was browner, to people in Kolkata, and they say he looks like he's Indian, he looks like he's South Asian. But you know, you also see Anglo-Indians in Kolkata that, were they not Christian and chiefly English speakers, although some people also speak Bengali or intermarry, you might not know. So they have Christian names, and it's a cultural thing, and it is about cultural heritage and yes, religion, and also being part of a diasporic community or legacy which comes out of colonialism, all of that is clear, right? Gone are those terms such as half-caste, which is what the British first used pejoratively in both India and Australia for those colonised populations, and the mixtures that were brought about as a result of either consensual relationships or relationships of convenience, or concubinage, in the cantonments, for example, soldiers with several women, bibbies. That is most likely where things start for us in direct descent. I remember, I'm not sure if it was on my first stay in Gorioha, but I was staying in a homestay, and the woman who runs that was looking at me over the kitchen table. She would often make me masala tea, masala chai, and like of an afternoon, and we'd just sit around and chat. And she knew why I was visiting Kolkata, and she knew something about my Anglo-Indian heritage. And she looked at me over the table and she said, I can see that you have Bengali bones, you have Bangladeshi bone structure. Of course, that's also Bengali. But I found it interesting that she would put me in the Bangladeshi box rather than, you know what I mean, like from West Bengal. That has a whole history behind it as well. I really don't know how to assume the way people in any number of sites may read me, ethnically, racially, definitely gender-wise, and sexuality-wise. I'm used to being in that space, I guess, as well as just being hot and bothered. And I get called white, I get called... Sometimes I even get assumed to be a person of colour. It's a very loose term, and it is socially constructed, just like whiteness is. But there are processes of racialization that I don't experience. But I think it's really important to speak truthfully to our histories, our heritage, our lineages, and also the things that we... especially in Anglo-Indian families, feel ambivalent about, that people don't want to own up to, that they'd rather keep in the shadows, and that sometimes they've had to during processes of White Australia policy, for example, and assimilation. So that's a heavy burden. How does one identify as white in that context? If it was kind of coercive or a matter of survival. It's always been a sticking point for me, because I have been asked from a young age, in Perth, Western Australia in the 70s and 80s, when the bandwidth about these things was much more reduced in white dominant areas, like, where are you from? And that automatically put me on alert. But also family habits were quite different. I remember going into quote-unquote white families, white working-class family environments, and being really shocked and surprised by what they ate. My mom was so cautious about how she cooked and allotted food, and definitely her food had flavour and variety, but in these white working-class contexts, people ate junk food. They ate white bread. We were never allowed to just eat like cheap, tip-top bread. Like if you're in the US, that would be Wonder Bread. So sometimes people would come across from the church, friends of the family, and eat at our house because my mum made things spicy. And she did this typical kind of mishmash of, it's very Anglo-Indian, it's very improvised, where she cut up sausages and mixed them in with beans and spices and chili, and served it on rice. Now, a friend called that bean stuff, and she was from an English family, and she would come around and say, my mum can't cook like this. My mum just pulls things out of the deep freeze. And you see, my mum was adamantly against things like that. So there's an example of the cultural dimension, I guess. So it's a really difficult question to answer. Are you white? I mean, if I say I am, I'm erasing all of that lineage, and also the tendency to constantly, out of fear, self-erase. And that's not the part of post-colonial time that we're in now. And I do look different, even if it's just bone structure and not phenotype, and I have the privileges of whiteness. There are ways in which people have scrutinized me growing up. As I said, where are you from? It doesn't necessarily routinely happen these days because there's much more racial and cultural diversity in this country. But I think people have issues with understanding mixture as well. So what are your thoughts on this matter?